So I recently had a conversation with somebody where they told me they didn't know that you could use punctuation in a poem. They thought a poem was a poem when you didn't use punctuation. And that thought blew my mind. There are so many incredible ways to use formatting and punctuation in a poem to help give it emphasis. So today I want to talk about a few different methods, some less traditional than others, that you can use for both formatting and punctuation in your poetry writing and other writing. The first two I want to talk about are line breaks. Line breaks are where you break each line. It's a really simple tool, but it can be really fun to add emphasis or pauses to places where you want them. I'm going to be using samples from my own poetry that I've written over the years to show some of these. So this shows careful, deliberate line breaks, specifically because this is a reverse poem. It can be read in either way, and the meaning changes each time. Reverse poems are possible because of careful line breaks and the intention within those line breaks. They're a fun, different challenge to try when you're trying to get used to being more conscientious about where you're breaking your lines. So, with those careful line breaks, also allow for different spaces and shapes. Having your poems also look like a physical shape is not a new technique. It can be seen in a lot of old poetry, but it's a fun one nonetheless. For example, with my poem here, it is based off of the myth of Icarus. He flies too close to the sun and his wax wings melt. The shape of this poem mimics a falling feather. If I had written this poem stagnant, it wouldn't have that same suspenseful feeling that a falling feather does. While this doesn't necessarily change the meaning of the poem and change the content of what I'm talking about, it adds a new dimension that it wouldn't have had otherwise. Okay, so now we're going to shift into some less traditional poetry and into some of the more fun stuff that I like, starting with strikeouts. Strikeouts are something I don't see used very often in not just poetry, but writing in general. But they say so much by not saying things. I consider strikeouts to be the writing equivalent of when you turn a light off. The moment you turn it off, there's that imprint of where the light used to be. Strikeouts are kind of like that. You're adding more to the poem by showing what was potentially there, or what was thought to be there, or what could have been there. I was really interested in the idea of non-traditional poetry, and I thought about strikeouts, and that's how this whole poem came about. It started with the idea of I want to write a poem with strikeouts, and I wrote a story from there, and I turned it into something else from that idea. There is no other punctuation that would have the same impact as the strikeouts did. It wouldn't read the same, it wouldn't feel the same if I put them in parentheses. It just wouldn't have that same meaning. I really like strikeouts because it gives it very much a journal feeling, and I like journal a lot, so I thought that was a really cool element to it. So I had a lot of fun writing that strikeout poem, and I wanted to do more. And through wanting to do more, I discovered list poems. I wrote this poem from a prompt in my class. I had to tell a story without actually telling a story. And this was just after coming off of that strikeout poem, and I just found it so cool. And I combined the two and looked for ways to tell a story without telling the story, and ended up finding a list. I really like the idea of list poetry because it adds a sequential element to it. The strikeouts add another layer to it because, again, it's kind of telling the progress of time as it goes. At the time, I had talked to a friend, and some of this was from the conversation that we had about her experience. And so it all kind of merged together into this one poem. The strikeouts in this poem create a bit of a deeper reflection. You have to think back at what the last thing on the list was before moving forward, and in that, tell the story. So after writing that poem, I realized, wow, I write a lot of depressing poetry. So I went out of my way to write a more uplifting, positive poem using the tools that we just discussed. This poem contains a little bit of that backward reflection we saw in the reverse poem. It contains a careful line spacing and specific line breaks. It has the strikeouts, it has the list, and before anybody can say anything, this is only a snippet of the poem. I could not screenshot the whole thing of it because of the format it was in. So this is not the full poem. I promise you, it actually does end happier. But if you want to see the full version, that will be available on my Patreon in a few weeks. But there you go. Those are some of my personal favorite methods to use while thinking about writing and non-traditional poetry specifically. However, poems and writing in general can all use these tools, and I think you can add more depth than just words. A big part of writing is using your tools the most effective way possible, and part of being able to use them effectively is understanding how you can use them. So I like to share these different ways to use these potential tools. But that is all for today. Let me know what you thought about these different tools, techniques, and stylistic elements of writing. Do you use them? Do you want to use them? I would love to see what you come up with. Do you want to learn more about different formats of writing? I'm happy to go into more about different ones that I haven't touched on or go more in depth on ones I have. I post videos twice a week. I'll see you guys next time.